Happy June. Happy birthday to Dungsar Khyentse Rinpoche. We are so blessed to live in such times that we have such high lamas giving public speeches, discussions on Buddhism and Tantra. And if you have not watched the documentary, you should watch. I think it's called Words of My Perfect Guru, Wisdom of My Perfect Guru. It's on YouTube and I've watched it. It's really nice. It follows his disciples and their spiritual journey from Britain all the way to Bhutan. So we get an insight into how non-Tibetans follow the Dharma, and this happened right before 2001. And it's also an interesting slice of popular culture of Britain if you're interested in Britain. Today we will be reading from Dr. Donald Lopez's, oh, I got a sticker here, Donald S. Lopez's book on a Tibetan guru, pre 1940s. So this is during the time when Tibet was still an independent unit, independent of the People's Republic of China, and we fully support the Tibetan people and their needs for sovereignty. And so today is June 18th, 2024. Let us start. Page 11, The Life. The monastic colleges of the Gelug monasteries were divided into houses, which provided living quarters, meals, and instruction to monks from a particular geographic location. G.C. Gendun Chopel, the main character of this biography, Gendun Chopel joined one of the Amdo houses called Klubum, 100,000 Dragons. There, he studied with the most famous scholar of the house and one of the most prominent Gelug scholars of the day, Sherab Gyatso, 1884 to 1968. Their relationship apparently began well, but deteriorated when Gendun Chopel criticized the positions taken in the monastic textbooks of the college, which were the same that he had studied and criticized at Labrang. When he attended Sherab Gyatso's lectures, the two would fall into heated arguments. Sherab Gyatso eventually refused to address him by name, only calling him the Madman, which is the title of this book. Gendun Chopel seems to have eventually stopped attending classes, but would frequent the debating courtyard to confound his fellows, often challenging the best students while disguised as one of the illiterate Dabdop, a subgroup within the monastery that lacks a precise analog in monasticism of the West, but shares certain characteristics of college fraternity brothers. Gendun Chopel devoted much of his time to studying painting and was eventually able to earn a comfortable living making paintings, tankas, of various deities. So we have a tanka over here. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. Whatever his reputation may have been among his fellows, he seemed to have been a favorite of Papon Kappa, one of the powerful Gelug lamas of the day. Although there are conflicting reports about the degree of his participation in the monastic curriculum, he seems to have continued to live at Klubum House until 1934. He seems certainly to have completed the curriculum in Madhyamaka, Buma, and may have finished the last two courses in Vinaya as well. He did not, however, sit for the Geshe exam, but in later years would refer to himself as a Geshe. Like, I would call myself a PhD even though I didn't complete my graduate program. Several of his essays in the Mahabodhi are signed Lama Geshe Chopel. So the Mahabodhi was a very famous publication in India for Buddhism of the 20th century. In 1934, GC met the Indian scholar Rahul Sanskrityayan, 1893 to 1963, who was making his second visit to Tibet. Sanskrityayan, 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 although only 40 at the time, was already a distinguished Sanskritist and an active figure in the Indian independence movement. After a 6-month prison term at the hands of the British, he had become a member of the Indian Communist Party and a founder of the All India Kisan Sabha, which is the Farmers Association for farmers' rights. Sanskrityayan was seeking a Tibetan scholar to accompany him as he visited the monasteries of southern Tibet in search of Sanskrit manuscripts that had been brought there during the disseminations of Buddhism from India to Tibet, and he invited GC to join his expedition. GC ended up accompanying Pandit Rahul to Nepal and then on to India, where he was to spend the next 12 years. India. GC wrote little while in Tibet. Instead, his primary means of expression was that of the Gelug monk, the verbal sparring of the debating courtyard. Yet even in this most traditional form of discourse, he took on a different guise, sometimes appearing as an illiterate monk to defeat the brightest scholars, sometimes defending a non-Buddhist position against all opponents. It was during his time in India that he began to write in a serious way in a range of genres, cultivating a distinctive style. He also developed as an artist, moving far beyond the traditional Tibetan Tanka style that he had learned in Lhasa. So when they debate, sometimes they would go like, they would declare their positions, and it's very exciting to watch if you ever have the chance to see monks debate. A serious assessment of GC as an artist deserves a separate study that would include the publication of his drawings and paintings. My focus here is his thoughts as they are preserved in his writings. Thus, rather than attempt the difficult task of tracing his encounters during his time abroad, here we will examine some of the things he wrote during those years. His most important work, by his own estimation, is his travel journal, The Golden Surface, the story of a cosmopolitan's pilgrimage. Gyakam Rikpa Skorbai Tamgyur Segi Tangma. His longest work, its 17 chapters in 611 pages, constitute approximately half his surviving writings. While in India, he also wrote a guidebook to the Buddhist pilgrimage sites and a work on erotica. He studied several Dunhuang manuscripts on the Tibetan dynastic period as well as Tang historical records, which he used as the basis for his unfinished history of early Tibet, the White Annals. There are the Blue Annals, and then he wrote the White Annals. A work important for its attempt to demythologize the history of the Yarlung dynasty in Tibet and to discuss Tibet's role as a major military power in Inner Asia during the 6th and 7th centuries. In collaboration with other scholars, he translated various works from Sanskrit into Tibetan, from Pali into Tibetan, from Tibetan into English. He wrote newspaper articles in Tibetan and in English. He also wrote poetry in Tibetan and in English. In Tibetan, he developed a distinctive prose style, highly erudite but conversational in tone, employing a rich vocabulary but an informal presentation, never missing an occasion for irony even amid the most sober subjects. GC explains his style at the beginning of the chapter on Sri Lanka in his travel journal. What I have written, however, is not a treatise, an essay, or a text. I have written down in letters a conversation that is difficult to have because my mouth is separated from your ear by many yojanas, a unit of distance of approximately 5 miles. Yet his writing has none of the infelicities of the transcription of conversation. It is instead a highly studied and artful composition. GC writes for a large audience, the Tibetan people, often chastising them for their narrow-mindedness or extolling them to consider seriously what it is that he has to say. Although he seems to have found some success in India, being offered, for example, a professorship of Tibetan at Shantiniketan by Rabindranath Tagore himself, he often found himself in financial straits and consistently adopts the persona of the wandering beggar, sometimes calling himself Prangpo Yoddan, a discerning beggar, the stranger in a strange land. He writes often of being in a land that is unaccustomed, but carries a sense of the unknown and the unrecognized, where nothing is familiar because one has no family. GC's time in South Asia can be regarded as a series of encounters with the interlocking facets of certain modernity. He encounters and writes about modern scholarship, modern travel, modern geography, modern archaeology, modern science, modern religion, and modern love. Ishq, pyar, mohabbat. The setting for all of this is colonial India and Sri Lanka. And he also writes of colonialism in the final chapter of his travel journal. About 1959, years after the teacher passed away, the Europeans crossed the ocean, setting out to cover long distances. In particular, the people of Portugal, a small country located in a remote corner of the western foreign lands, were emboldened. By crossing the distant ocean, they discovered many lands, such as Africa. Before long, they also controlled the maritime routes of India. 19,043 years after the passing of the Buddha, a ship captain named Waliko arrived at the coast called Kilakana. It is generally the case that in every kind of worldly custom, the intelligence of Europeans is superior to ours in 1,000 ways. They could easily spin the heads of the peoples of the East and the South, who, honest but naive, have no experience of anything other than their own countries. And thus they came to many lands, large and small, accompanied by their armies. Their hearts were filled with only self-interest. In their sexual behavior, their lust was even greater than a donkey's. Sponsored by kings and ministers who disregarded others' welfare, they trod upon the happiness of others like a turnip on the ground, sending out a great army of bandits, calling them traitors. The timid peoples who subsisted in the forests of the small countries, terrified to hear even the braying of donkeys, were caught like sheep and taken to the foreigners' own countries. With feet and hands shackled in iron and given only enough food to wet their mouths, they were made to perform the most difficult work until they died. It is said that due to this severe hardship, even the young were unable to last more than 5 years. Young women were captured and, to arouse the desires of the gathered customers, were displayed naked in the middle of the marketplace and then sold. If thoughtful people heard how they treated the bodies of humans like cattle, their hearts would bleed. It is in this way that the foundations were laid for all the wonders of the world, railroads stretching from coast to coast, and multi-storied buildings whose summits cannot be seen from below. From Africa alone, the people thus captured numbered more than 1 million, and uncountable numbers of the unusable were put in huge boats and abandoned at sea. In this passage, probably composed in 1940 or 41, just 6 years after his departure from Tibet, GC describes the origin of European colonialism, beginning with the first Portuguese explorers. The ship captain named Waliko is presumably Vasco da Gama, who arrived at Calicut on the west coast of India in 1498. He is writing for a Tibetan audience and measures time in the traditional Buddhist way, from the year in which the Buddha entered nirvana. GC seems to have placed the Buddha's nirvana in 544 BCE, a date which he presumably learned while in Sri Lanka. Although, as we shall see below, GC's identity as a Tibetan is something that he repeatedly maintains, in the passage above he evinces a clear sense of solidarity with a rather undifferentiated peoples of the East and the South, the victims of the most inhuman exploitation at the hands of the Europeans. He goes on to describe the activities of Catholic missionaries and then the Dutch, but focuses particularly on the activities of the British in India. Although he praises the British for banning the practice of sati, the burning of widows on their husbands' funeral pyres, his evaluation of their rule in India is ultimately damning. They introduced the new ways of the modern world, such as railroads, schools, and factories. Their law is only good for the educated and the wealthy families. If one has money and knowledge, anything is permitted. As for the lowly, their small livelihoods that provide the necessities of life are sucked like blood from all their orifices. Sucked like blood from all their orifices. The marvelous land of India appears to be filled with hungry ghosts. So they, according to Buddhism, are one of the six realms. One of the six realms. At the same time, there was much that he admired among the Europeans, whom he often referred to simply as foreigners. Perhaps nothing more than their scientific knowledge. In addition to his posthumously published travel journals, GC wrote for journals and newspapers, including the only Tibetan language newspaper, Melong, published in Kalimpong by the Tibetan Christian Kunug Tarchen, 1890 to 1976. Melong's full title in Tibetan was Mirrors of the News from Various Homelands. In its June 28, 1938 issue, GC published an essay entitled The World is Round or Spherical under the pseudonym Honest Dharma, Drapung Dharma. Above the essay is a map of the world, presumably drawn by GC himself, showing latitude and longitude, with the names of the continents written in Tibetan cursive script. There are two circles, with North America and South America in one, and Africa, Europe, Asia, and Australia in the other. Below is a single globe, perhaps meant to show that the earth is not two globes, but one. Above the map, one reads in Tibetan, Map of the Round World. I translate the essay in its entirety here. The world is round or spherical. In the past, in the lands of the continent of Europe, it was said that the world is flat, just as it appears to the non-analytical mind. There is not a single person who said that it was round. All the ancient religions in the various lands said only that the world is flat. There was not only one that said that it was round. There was not one that said it was round. Thus, when some intelligent people first said that it was round, the only method to keep it from spreading was to order that they be burned alive. However, in the end, unable to withstand the light of true knowledge, everyone came to believe that it is round. Today, not only has the fact that it is round been determined, but also the size of all islands in the world, just 4 or 5 yojanas long, have been measured down to spans and cubits. Therefore, in the great lands, there is not a single scholar who has even a doubt. Among all the Buddhists in Sinhala, Burma, Ceylon, perhaps he meant Siam, Japan, and so forth, because Sinhala is Ceylon, there is not one who says that it is untrue that it is round. Yet we in Tibet still hold stubbornly to the position that it is not. Some say mindless, foolish things, such as the foreigner sending of ships into the ocean, is a deception. I have also seen some intelligent persons who understand that it is round, but fearing slander by others, remain unable to say so. When even the most obstinate European scholars who do not believe in anything without seeing the reason directly were not able to maintain the position that it is not round, and accepted it completely, and there is no need to talk about the stubbornness of ours not coming to an end. Saying that the world is not round because the Buddha stated that it is flat is not accepted as authoritative in other non-Buddhist schools, and thus does not do a pinprick of damage to their assertion that it is round. even with regard to the scriptures of our own Buddhist school, which does accept the Buddha's statement as authoritative, because the majority of sutras were set forth by the Buddha in accordance with the thoughts of sentient beings. Even in this case, we do not know what is provisional and what is definitive. If he set forth even matters of great importance, such as emptiness and the stages of the path to liberation in various types of provisional means in accordance with the thoughts of sentient beings, what need is there to discuss these presentations of environments and their inhabitants? During the lifetime of the Buddha, which occasionally happened that the way the monks ate their food did not accord with the customs of the time and place, causing slight concern among the laity, he would make a rule that it was unsuitable. At that time, throughout the world, the words, "the world is flat," was as famous as the wind. Thus, even if the Buddha had said, "it is round," whose ear would it have entered? Even if he had said so emphatically, it would have no purpose. Even if he had demonstrated it with his miraculous powers. Nowadays, at the time when the fact that the world is round has become evident to billions of beings, there are still those of us who say, "This is your deception." In the same way, I am certain that they would not have believed it, saying, "This is the magic trick of Gautama." If all of us would believe in this world that we see with our eyes rather than the world that we see through letters, it would be good. Without seeking to overstate the frequently overstated isolation of Tibet, we can note that in 1938, the year that this essay was published in Kalimpong, Hitler annexed Austria. Otto Hahn produced the first nuclear fission of the uranium. Howard Hughes, flying a twin-engine Lockheed, set a new record for the circumnavigation of the globe. Color television was first demonstrated. The first Xerox image was produced. Teflon was discovered. What is Teflon? The ballpoint pen was patented. The ballpoint pen was patented. The first Superman episode appeared in Action Comics. Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered. Benny Goodman's orchestra performed Sing 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 at Carnegie Hall. In the same year, GC was attempting to prove to his countrymen that the world was not flat. Is that the point of the essay? Okay, that was Dr. Lopez's commentary. I don't think that's the point of the essay. Like, consider this thing about the theory of how this pandemic started, right? Like, people are still debating about it. So I think that's why he wrote this essay. He's trying to say that even if there are some things that are true, this is my interpretation after just reading it. Even if some things are true in some people's minds, it is never going to be proven to the masses. That's just how Tantra works, in my opinion. So thanks for listening, guys, and happy birthday again to Donsar Kensei Rinpoche. He knows what I'm saying, so if you don't believe me, you can fact check with him. So take care. Bye. And shout out Rahul Sanskritayan for sponsoring and helping him while he was in India.